A mountain of a man, 300 pounds of muscle and rage, exploded through the entrance of Redwood Medical Clinic, covered in someone else's blood, transforming a quiet Wednesday evening into the opening act of a nightmare. Mohammad Herrera, high-ranking rebel commander with a bounty on his head, hurled 2 armed security guards into the waiting room chairs like they were made of paper, sending doctors scrambling for exits and patients diving for cover, while the nearest police response was still 10 minutes away. In the eye of the storm, an impossible figure stepped forward. Carole Cox. She was the timid rookie nurse who'd been chewed out for shaking hands just an hour before, but she didn't duck behind the nurse's station. Instead, she walked straight into Herrera's kill zone, looked the blood-soaked giant in the eyes, and did something that froze every person in that clinic, something that proved the trembling mouse was actually a caged predator in hospital blues. The wall clock in the intake area of Redwood Medical Clinic clicked past 9:45 p.m. It was a humid Wednesday in late August, the kind of night where the air conditioning fought a losing battle and the emergency generator hummed ominously in the background. The clinic sat 40 miles outside the capital, serving a rural community that straddled government territory and rebel-controlled zones. Inside the triage bay, yellowed fluorescent tubes cast harsh shadows across outdated equipment. Cox, for the love of God, stop second-guessing yourself. The cutting voice of Chief Medical Officer Dr. Helena Sterling sliced through the quiet murmur of the clinic. Sterling was 52, battle-hardened from years in field hospitals, and moved with the ruthless efficiency of someone who'd learned to prioritize survival over sympathy. She stood with arms crossed, her surgical mask dangling from one ear as she glared at the newest member of the nursing staff. Carole Cox flinched almost imperceptibly. She was 31 but carried herself like someone trying to disappear. Standing barely 5'5", she seemed almost swallowed by her crisp blue scrubs that somehow looked too clean, too new. Her dark hair was pulled back into a severe bun so tight it seemed painful, every strand disciplined into submission. She kept her gaze locked on the supply cart she was organizing, her fingers hovering over the trauma shears. "Sorry, Dr. Sterling," Carole said softly, her voice threadbare. "I was just double-checking the morphine count for—" "I don't need you to check what the pharmaceutical log already tracked," Sterling interrupted, snatching a patient chart from the counter. "I need you to assist with patients and stop acting like you're afraid to touch them. You've been here 6 weeks, Cox, and you still move like you're walking on glass. Security Chief Mendez is already questioning why I vouched for you." Carole nodded, a flush creeping up her neck. She didn't defend herself. She never did. Since arriving at Redwood Medical, Carole had been practically invisible. She ate meals alone in the break room. She never joined the other nurses for their Friday drink runs into town. When trauma cases rolled in machete wounds, gunshot victims, the brutal realities of a clinic on the edge of a war zone, Carole always faded to the periphery, handling intake forms or sterilizing instruments, while the veteran nurses waded into the carnage. The unspoken consensus among the staff was clear. Carole Cox was soft. She belonged in a quiet suburban clinic doing wellness checks and flu shots, not in a frontier medical facility where violence was a daily visitor. "Look at her hands," whispered Dr. Sterling to the night physician, Dr. Marcus Webb, near the coffee station. Sterling was the acting authority that evening, brilliant, abrasive, and possessed of an ego that filled the entire wing. She gestured with her pen toward Carole, who was struggling with a lock on a medication cabinet. "She's actually shaking. If something serious walks through those doors tonight, she's going to crack. Mark my words." Webb, younger and less jaded, shrugged. "Maybe she's just nervous. New environment and all." "She's scared," Sterling said flatly. "Some people have the constitution for field medicine, and some people don't. She's prey in a predator's world. Out here, that gets you killed." Carole heard every word. Her hearing was exceptional, though she'd learned to pretend otherwise. She finally got the cabinet open, retrieved a box of gauze, and moved toward exam room 3 to dress a minor burn on a farmer's forearm. As she worked, her hands did tremble, but if anyone had watched with a trained eye, they would have noticed something deeply wrong with that tremor. It wasn't fear, it was suppression. When the farmer, a weathered man named Santiago, winced as she cleaned the wound, Carole's voice shifted. It dropped into a lower register, becoming steady and almost hypnotic. Breathe slowly, Santiago. Focus on the ceiling fan. Count the rotations. You're safe. I've got you. Her movements, awkward and hesitant under Brenda's scrutiny earlier, suddenly became surgical fluid, economical, precise. She wrapped the burn with a speed that bordered on mechanical, each layer of gauze placed with perfect tension and symmetry. Santiago glanced down at his arm. Damn, nurse. You've done this before. Military. Carole blinked, and the mask slid back into place. Her shoulders hunched. She became small again. Just training. Standard nursing school stuff. She escaped the room before he could ask anything more. Back at the nurse's station, the radio crackled to life with a burst of static. Redwood Clinic. This is Mobile Unit 7. We're inbound, ETA 2 minutes. We've got a hostile individual, approximately 40 years old, covered in blood not his own. Highly agitated. Possible psychotic break. He's massive, over 6 feet, easily 300 pounds. Vital signs stable, but he's non-compliant and violent. We need security ready. Dr. Sterling grabbed the radio. Copy, Unit 7. Bring him through the south entrance. Security will meet you. She looked at Carole, her expression dripping with condescension. Cox, take the intake bay, and try not to let him scare you into hiding. Carole nodded silently and moved toward the entrance. But as she walked, something changed in her eyes, something cold, something calculating, something that had been sleeping for 3 long years. The automatic doors hissed open, and Mohammad Herrera, drenched in crimson and fury, stepped into the light. The automatic doors slid open with a mechanical hiss, and Mohammad Herrera didn't walk into Redwood Medical Clinic. He detonated into it. The first thing everyone noticed was the blood. It painted his face in streaks like war paint, matted his dark hair to his forehead, and had soaked through patches of his olive-drab tactical jacket until the fabric looked black in the fluorescent light. His boots left crimson prints on the white linoleum. His eyes were wild, darting, the whites visible all around the irises like a spooked horse, but there was nothing remotely fragile about the rest of him. He stood at least 6'3", with shoulders that seemed to fill the doorway and arms thick as fence posts. His chest heaved with ragged breaths, and his fists were clenched so tight the knuckles had gone bone white beneath the gore. Where are they? Herrera's voice was a roar that rattled the intake windows. Where are the bastards who followed me? Security Chief Mendez, a former military policeman who'd seen action in 3 border conflicts, moved forward with his hand on his baton. He was joined by Officer Ruiz, younger but well-trained. They positioned themselves between Herrera and the main clinic corridor, hands raised in what they hoped was a calming gesture. "Sir, you need to calm down," Mendez said, his voice firm but measured. "This is a medical facility. We're here to help you, but you need to." Herrera's arm shot out with terrifying speed. He grabbed Mendez by the front of his uniform shirt and hurled him sideways into the waiting room chairs. The security chief's body crashed through 3 plastic seats before slamming into the wall with a sound like a gunshot. Patients screamed. A mother clutched her child and ran for the exit. Ruiz went for his radio, but Herrera was already on him. The rebel commander caught the younger officer by the collar and belt, lifted him completely off the ground as if he weighed nothing, and threw him into the intake desk. The laminate counter cracked. Ruiz crumpled to the floor, gasping for air. "Liars. All of you are liars." Herrera spun in a circle, his eyes scanning the room with paranoid intensity. "They said I'd be safe here. They said." He grabbed a rolling 4 stand and hurled it down the hallway. It clattered and sparked as it hit the floor. "Nobody's safe. Nobody." Dr. Sterling had already disappeared into her office, the door slamming behind her. Dr. Webb was frantically calling for police backup, his voice high and panicked. 2 nurses fled toward the rear exit, The remaining staff pressed themselves against walls, trying to become invisible. Carole Cox stood perfectly still near the nurse's station. Her hands, which had been trembling moments before, went completely motionless. Her breathing slowed. Her eyes, previously downcast and avoidant, lifted and locked onto Mohammad Herrera with a focus so intense it was almost predatory. She wasn't scanning his face or his blood-soaked clothes. She was analyzing. Target assessment. Male, approximately 300 pounds, 6'3", exhibiting signs of acute paranoid psychosis likely exacerbated by stimulants or trauma. Muscle density suggests combat training. Movement patterns indicate close quarters combat experience. Threat level, extreme. Civilian casualties, imminent. The thoughts cascaded through her mind in less than 2 seconds. Automatic as breathing, a ghost reflex from a life she'd tried to bury. Her eyes swept the room with surgical precision. 3 exits. Main entrance blocked by Herrera. East corridor 40 feet, 2 exposed. Emergency exit, 60 feet, requires passing target. Improvised weapons. Defibrillator cart, heavy, unwieldy. Oxygen tanks, explosive risk. IV poles, insufficient reach against superior mass. Optimal strategy, close quarters subdual, vascular disruption, non-lethal. She felt her hands start to shake again. But this time, it wasn't restraint. It was anticipation. The monster in her cage was rattling the bars. Herrera grabbed a plastic chair and hurled it at the intake window. The glass spiderwebbed but didn't shatter. He was deteriorating fast, descending deeper into whatever paranoid hellscape his mind had constructed. "You're all part of it," he screamed. "The cleanup crew. They sent you to..." Herrera. The voice cut through the chaos like a blade through silk. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It was calm, controlled, and it carried a frequency that bypassed reason and spoke directly to trained instinct. The rebel commander froze. His head snapped toward the source. Carole Cox stood in the center of the intake area. Her posture no longer hunched. Her shoulders were squared, her spine straight, and her hands hung loose at her sides, not the loose of fear, but the loose of someone ready to move in any direction with lethal efficiency. Her eyes were locked on his, unblinking. "Herrera, Mohammad Herrera, Sergeant Commander, 3rd Revolutionary Brigade." Her voice was different now. All the timid softness was gone, replaced by something harder, something that rang with authority. "You are experiencing acute paranoid delusion likely triggered by sympathomimetic toxicity or traumatic dissociation. You are not in hostile territory. This is a neutral medical facility. No combatants are present. Do you copy?" The change in Herrera's demeanor was immediate and unsettling. His eyes, which had been roving wildly around the room, fixed on Carole with sudden, desperate focus. The military jargon had pierced whatever fog was drowning his rational mind, hooking into training so deep it was muscle memory. "Copy," he rasped, the word automatic. Then confusion flooded his face. Who are you?" "Call sign Ghost," Carole said, and the lie came so easily it scared her. "I'm your extraction asset. You've been compromised. We need to secure this position before hostile forces arrive. Do you understand?" It was complete fiction, but it was exactly what his fractured mind needed to hear. Herrera's breathing slowed fractionally, his fists unclenched slightly. The paranoia was still there, coiled like a snake. But now it had direction, purpose. "Extraction," he repeated. They said nobody was coming. They said I was burned." "Negative," Carole said, taking a single step forward. "Slow, controlled, non-threatening. You were never burned. This is a delayed action recovery. But I need you to stand down and let me treat your injuries before we can proceed. Are you wounded?" Herrera looked down at himself as if seeing the blood for the first time. It's not mine. There was an ambush. My unit. They're all." His voice cracked, and for a moment, the dangerous rebel commander vanished, replaced by a traumatized man teetering on the edge of collapse. Carole took another step. She was 15 feet away now, still outside his immediate strike range, but close enough that her voice could drop to something almost gentle. "I know," she said softly. "I know what you saw. But right now, I need you to focus. I need you to trust me. Can you do that?" Herrera's eyes searched her face, desperate for something solid to hold on to. Behind him, Dr. Webb was gesturing frantically at Carole to get back, to stop engaging, but she ignored him. Every fiber of her being was locked onto the massive man in front of her. I don't know who to trust anymore," Herrera whispered, and there was so much broken humanity in those words that Carole felt something twist in her chest. "Then trust your training," she said. "You've been in the field too long. You're running on fumes and adrenaline. Your judgment is compromised, but your training isn't. And your training is telling you that I'm not a threat, isn't it?" Herrera blinked. Slowly, incrementally, his shoulders began to lower. The coiled violence in his posture started to unwind. "Yeah," he breathed. "Yeah, you're not a threat." "That's right," Carole said, taking another step. 10 feet now. "So here's what's going to happen. You're going to let me approach. I'm going to check your vitals, and then we're going to figure out next steps together. Understood?" "Understood," Herrera said, and the relief in his voice was heartbreaking. Carole closed the distance. 8 feet, 6 feet. She could smell the copper tang of blood and the acrid stench of sweat and gunpowder, could see the way his pupils were blown wide, the tremor in his hands that spoke of either stimulants or extreme physical exhaustion. Up close, he was even more massive than she'd estimated. His forearms were corded with muscle, his chest broad enough that he probably had trouble finding body armor that fit properly. 3 feet. She raised her hand slowly, telegraphing the movement. "I'm going to check your pulse now, okay?" Herrera nodded, his eyes still locked on hers with desperate trust. Carole's fingers touched the side of his neck, finding the carotid artery. His pulse was racing, thready and irregular. She frowned, her other hand coming up as if to steady him. "Your heart rate is elevated," she said gently. "I need you to take a slow breath for me. Can you do that?" Herrera inhaled, and the moment his chest expanded, Carole moved. Her left arm whipped around his neck from the front, her forearm driving into his trachea while her bicep and forearm created a V-shaped vice around the sides of his throat. Simultaneously, her right hand shot to the back of his head, fingers locking into his hair, and she yanked his skull forward and down while stepping to his right side and pivoting her hips. The angle was perfect. Her left forearm compressed his carotid arteries with surgical precision, cutting off blood flow to his brain without crushing his airway. It was a textbook blood choke, executed with the kind of technical perfection that only came from hundreds of hours of practice and real-world application. Herrera's eyes went wide with shock and betrayal. He tried to roar, but all that came out was a strangled gasp. His hands shot up, grabbing at Carole's arm, but she had already adjusted her position. She'd hooked her right leg behind his right knee and was using her entire body weight as leverage, pulling him off balance while maintaining perfect compression on the carotid arteries. He was 3 times her size, but physics didn't care about size. Leverage did. Technique did. Herrera staggered backward, trying to use his superior mass to slam her into the wall. But Carole rode the movement, her body molded to his back like a shadow. When he crashed into the intake desk, she absorbed the impact through her legs and core, never releasing pressure for even a split second. Her forearm was a steel bar across his throat. "Shh," she whispered into his ear, her voice returning to that strange, hypnotic calm. "Stop fighting. You'll be unconscious in 8 seconds. 7, 6. It doesn't hurt if you stop fighting." Herrera's struggles became weaker. His hands, which had been clawing at her arm with desperate strength, began to fall away. His knees buckled. 5 seconds. 4 seconds. His eyes rolled back. 3. 2. His massive body went completely limp, a dead weight that Carole controlled with practiced ease, lowering him to the floor in a controlled descent rather than letting him crash. The entire takedown, from first contact to unconsciousness, Had taken exactly 11 seconds. Carole released the choke the instant he went out, immediately checking his pulse and airway. His breathing was shallow but steady, pulse still elevated but normalizing. He'd wake up in 60 to 90 seconds with nothing worse than a headache and confusion. She looked up. Every single person in the clinic was staring at her with expressions ranging from shock to outright terror. Dr. Webb's mouth was hanging open. Officer Mendez, clutching his ribs as he struggled to his feet, looked like he'd seen a ghost. Literally, Carole's hand started to shake again. But this time it was different. This time it was the crash, the adrenaline dump, the horrifying realization of what she'd just done. She'd blown 3 years of careful invisibility in 11 seconds. She started, her voice coming out small and fragile again. I took a self-defense class, in college. I just reacted. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. But nobody was buying it. Not anymore. Dr. Sterling emerged from her office, her face pale. She looked at Carole, then at the unconscious rebel commander, then back at Carole. What the hell are you? Sterling whispered. Before Carole could answer, before she could even begin to construct a lie that might salvage this disaster, the sound of helicopter rotors began to thrum in the distance, growing rapidly louder. Officer Ruiz, still gasping for breath on the floor, managed to pull out his radio. That's not our police chopper. That's military grade. Carole's blood went cold. She knew that sound. She knew exactly what kind of helicopter made that particular rhythmic thunder. Black Arrow. The cleanup crew had arrived, and suddenly, staying invisible wasn't an option anymore. Suddenly, the only option was survival. She looked down at Mohammad Herrera's unconscious form, at the blood covering his face and hands, and understood with terrible clarity that whatever he'd been running from had finally caught up. And now, because she'd been stupid enough to reveal herself, it had caught up to her too. The mouse in blue scrubs was gone. The lion had woken up, and the clinic was about to become a battlefield. The helicopter rotors grew louder, close enough now that the windows began to rattle in their frames. Carole's mind raced through calculations, probabilities, escape routes, all the tactical thinking she'd tried to bury for 3 years surging back like muscle memory. Dr. Sterling was still staring at her, but now the shock was hardening into something sharper. The doctor moved toward the nurse's station, her fingers flying across the keyboard. Jenkins said she took a self-defense class in college. Sterling muttered, pulling up personnel files. Let's see what college that was. Carole felt her stomach drop. She'd known this moment would come eventually, it always did, but she'd hoped for more time. Just a little more time. Carole Marie Cox, Sterling read aloud, her voice taking on an edge of disbelief. Graduated from St. Catherine's School of Nursing in Delaware, 2022. 3 years of clinical experience at... She paused, frowning at the screen. Then she picked up the phone, dialing with sharp, angry jabs. Yes, this is Dr. Helena Sterling at Redwood Medical. I need to verify credentials for one of our nurses. Carole Marie Cox. License number. She went silent, listened, her face drained of color. That's impossible, Sterling said into the phone. I'm looking at her personnel file right now. Her transcripts, her licensing exam scores, her clinical rotations. Another pause, longer this time. I see. No, I understand. Thank you. She hung up slowly, her hand shaking slightly as she turned to face Carole. St. Catherine's School of Nursing has never had a student named Carole Cox, Sterling said, her voice barely above a whisper. The license number you provided? It belongs to a 67-year-old nurse in Oregon who's been retired for 5 years. Your entire file, your transcripts, your certifications, your background check, it's all fabricated. Professional-grade fabrication. The kind that costs 6 figures and requires access to federal databases. Officer Mendez had struggled to his feet, one hand pressed against his bruised ribs. He was looking at Carole with new eyes, now, not fear exactly, but wary respect. The kind of look you gave a predator you'd mistaken for prey. Who are you, really? Carole opened her mouth, but whatever lie she might have constructed died on her lips as the helicopter descended into the clinic's small parking lot. Through the windows, she could see it now, a Black Hawk painted in unmarked matte grey, the kind that didn't exist on any official registry. The side doors slid open before it even touched down, and 8 figures in full tactical gear dropped out with the fluid precision of a well-trained kill team. They weren't wearing military insignia. They were wearing black body armor, with a small arrow emblem on the shoulder. Black Arrow Security. Private military contractors with a reputation for taking jobs that required absolute discretion and 0 survivors. "Oh God," Dr. Webb breathed, backing away from the windows. "Those aren't police. Those aren't even military." Carole's training took over completely. She grabbed Mendez by the arm, her voice dropping into that command frequency again. "How many people are still in the building?" Mendez blinked, caught off guard by the sudden shift. Maybe 20. Staff and patients. Most of the patients ran when... "Are the basement levels accessible from inside?" "Yes, but it's just storage, the morgue, and the old boiler room. The heating system hasn't worked properly in years." "Perfect." Carole looked down at Herrera, who was starting to stir, a low groan escaping his lips. She made a decision that she knew would haunt her. "Everyone still in this building needs to evacuate through the rear exit right now. Tell them it's a chemical spill, a fire drill. I don't care, just get them out." "Doctor," Sterling, "you have 30 seconds before that team comes through those doors, and when they do, anyone who's seen me or Herrera is a liability they'll neutralize. Do you understand?" Sterling's professional composure cracked. "They're going to kill us? For witnessing?" "You didn't witness anything," Carole snapped. "Because you're going to be gone. Move. Now." The command in her voice was absolute, and to her credit, Sterling recognized survival when she heard it. She grabbed Webb's arm and ran for the east corridor, shouting for staff to evacuate. Mendez hesitated, his hand moving toward his sidearm. "Don't," Carole said softly. "You're brave, but you're not trained for this. Get your people out. I'll handle it." "How?" Mendez demanded. "There are 8 of them. They're armed with—" "I know what they're armed with," Carole interrupted. HK-416S, probably suppressed. Thermal optics, flashbangs and fragmentation grenades. Level IV body armor with trauma plates. I know because I used to train teams exactly like this one. She met his eyes. "Trust me when I say you do not want to be here for what happens next." Mendez stared at her for 2 more seconds, then nodded once and ran. Carole dropped to her knees beside Herrera, slapping his face lightly. "Herrera, Mohammad, wake up. We need to move." His eyes fluttered open, unfocused and confused. What happened?" "I choked you out," Carole said bluntly. "You're welcome. Now we have about 45 seconds before a kill team comes through that door looking for you. Can you walk?" Herrera's eyes sharpened as consciousness returned fully. Despite everything, despite the betrayal of being subdued, some part of him recognized the truth in her voice. "Kill team? Not a rescue? Does Black Arrow sound like a rescue to you?" His face went pale beneath the dried blood. "They found me. They actually found me." "They found both of us," Carole corrected, hauling him to his feet with surprising strength. He swayed but stayed upright. "Which means we're going to do something really stupid together. Can you run?" "I can fight. I need you to run." She grabbed his arm and pulled him toward the stairwell door that led to the basement levels. Behind them, the clinic's main entrance exploded inward with a controlled breach, not loud, not dramatic, just the professional hiss of pneumatic rams doing their job. Boots hit the floor in synchronized rhythm. Carole and Herrera crashed through the stairwell door and started down. The stairs were concrete, poorly lit, and smelled of mildew and disinfectant. 2 flights down, they emerged into a hallway lined with storage rooms and old equipment. The fluorescent lights flickered intermittently, casting strobing shadows. "Where are we going?" Herrera gasped, his earlier paranoia now replaced with combat-focused clarity. "Morgue," Carole said, navigating the maze of hallways with absolute certainty. Then the boiler room, The thermal imaging they're using will light us up like Christmas trees in most of the building. But down here in the basement, we've got heat sources and insulation we can exploit. You know their equipment. I told you. I used to train people like them. She stopped at a heavy metal door marked morgue. Authorized personnel only, yanking it open. The temperature dropped immediately, cold air rolling out. Inside, now, they entered a room lined with refrigeration units, the kind designed to preserve bodies. A single examination table sat in the center, surgical lights hanging dark and dormant overhead. Carole moved to a supply cabinet and started pulling items with rapid precision: surgical tubing, a scalpel, alcohol prep pads, gauze. Herrera watched her work, his soldier's mind putting pieces together. You're not extracting me. No. You're not a nurse. No. But you're not one of them either. Carole paused, meeting his eyes. For a moment, the mask slipped completely, and Herrera saw something ancient and tired looking back at him. I used to be. Then I died. And then I tried very hard to stay dead. What changed? You walked into my clinic bleeding and broken, and I made the mistake of caring. She handed him the gauze. Wipe the blood off your face. We're about to get very loud, and I need you to see clearly. Above them, boots thundered through the clinic. Efficient, methodical, room-by-room clearing. They'd find the empty nurse's station, the unconscious security guard, and the absence of bodies. Then they'd start looking for survivors. And when thermal imaging showed 2 heat signatures in the basement, they'd come down hard and fast. Carole moved to the morgue's rear wall, where old pipes ran floor to ceiling. She found what she was looking for, a main steam line that fed the building's defunct heating system. The pipe was ancient, probably original to the building's construction 40 years ago, and it was still under pressure because nobody had bothered to properly decommission the system. When I rupture this pipe, Carole said, gripping a heavy fire extinguisher from the corner, this entire sublevel is going to fill with superheated steam. Their thermal optics will white out completely. They'll be blind for 60 to 90 seconds. Herrera's eyes widened with understanding. You're going to hunt them in the whiteout. We're going to hunt them, Carole corrected. I need you to cover the east corridor while I take the west. Can you do that? Instead of answering, Herrera moved to the examination table and hefted it experimentally. It was solid steel, probably 200 pounds. He gripped the edge and nodded. I can do damage with this. Conserve your strength. Wait for them to enter your kill zone, then make it count. Carole positioned herself near the steam pipe, the fire extinguisher raised like a battering ram. One more thing. When this is over, if we both survive, I'm going to need you to disappear and never speak about what happens in this basement. Can you do that? Herrera studied her for a long moment. Who were you before you died? Someone who believed in things, Carole said quietly. Someone who did terrible things for what she thought were good reasons. Someone who learned too late that she was on the wrong side. And now I'm just trying not to add to the body count. She hefted the extinguisher. Ready? The sound of boots reached the stairwell, tactical hand signals being exchanged in silence. 8 operators moving as one organism, weapons raised, thermals activated. Carole swung the extinguisher with every ounce of strength she possessed. It connected with the steam pipe in an explosion of tortured metal, and instantly the basement erupted into chaos. Superheated steam screamed from the rupture like a living thing, filling the corridor in seconds. The temperature spiked 20 degrees in the span of a heartbeat. Through the whiteout, Carole could hear shouted commands, the distinctive electronic whine of thermal optics overloading, the confusion of an elite team suddenly rendered blind. She moved into the steam like a ghost, returning to her natural element. The first operator never knew what hit him. He was trying to switch from thermal to night vision when Carole materialized from the white fog, her hand striking his weapon's receiver and jamming the bolt open. Before he could react, she'd swept his legs and driven his own knee into his face with enough force to crack his helmet. He went down hard. Carole stripped his sidearm and kept moving. The second operator was smarter. had already switched to night vision and was moving in a defensive crouch. But Carole had spent 3 years studying these tactics from the inside, and she knew the flaw in the doctrine. Night vision required artificial light sources to amplify, and in pure darkness filled with steam, it was worse than useless. She threw a metal tray from a nearby equipment cart. It clattered off to the operator's left, and when he turned toward the sound, Carole came from the right. 2 shots, center mass. The body armor held, but the kinetic impact drove him backward into a wall. She closed the distance and used the scalpel she'd palmed to cut the straps on his helmet, then delivered a precise strike to his temple. He collapsed. Sounds of struggle erupted from the east corridor, Herrera keeping his end of the bargain. The crash of the examination table meeting flesh and bone, a scream cut short. The remaining operators regrouped fast, switching tactics. Flashbangs detonated in the steam, trying to disorient through sound and pressure waves. Carole had already moved, ascending a maintenance ladder to a catwalk that ran along the ceiling. From this vantage, she could see the thermal bloom of bodies moving below, confusion giving way to professional calm as they adapted to the environment. A voice crackled through their comms, audible even through the steam. Targets are engaged. Repeat, targets are engaged. Authorization to go lethal on both principles. Both principles. They were here to kill Herrera and anyone who'd helped him, which meant Carole had no choice but to finish this. She dropped from the catwalk onto the squad leader, identified by his different helmet configuration and the radio pack on his back. They went down together in a tangle of limbs. He was good, trained by the same programs she'd been trained by. But he made the mistake of trying to bring his rifle to bear in close quarters. Carole controlled the weapon, using her body weight and leverage to redirect the muzzle toward the ceiling while her other hand found the quick release on his chest rig. She yanked it free and rolled away as he struggled to regain control of his weapon. But she'd taken his ammunition pouches, his grenades, his secondary weapon. In close quarters combat, that was a death sentence. The fight devolved into brutal, close-range chaos. Carole moved through the steam like a phantom, using salvaged weapons and improvised tools, a length of pipe here, an oxygen tank there. She wasn't trying to kill. 3 years of trying to be something better than a weapon had instilled that much discipline, but she was absolutely trying to neutralize, and the operators of Black Arrow found themselves outmatched by someone who knew every tactic they'd use before they used it. When the steam finally began to clear, 6 operators lay unconscious or incapacitated in the corridors. Herrera stood in the east hall, breathing hard, covered in new blood not his own, with the examination table dented and streaked with crimson beside him. Only 2 operators remained, and they'd retreated to the stairwell for a defensible position. But they'd made a critical error. Carole had circled behind them. "Drop the weapons," she said from the darkness behind them, her voice utterly calm. "You've lost. Your team is down. Extraction is not coming. Drop them. And you walk out of here with nothing worse than bruises." The 2 operators exchanged glances. Slowly, professionally, they lowered their weapons to the ground. "Smart," Carole said. "Now the radios. And the phones. Everything electronic goes in a pile." They complied. When they were disarmed and stripped of communications, Carole gestured for them to go. "Tell whoever hired you that Mohammad Herrera is off the board. He's been extracted by a third party. Tell them Ghost is still active. Tell them if they keep looking for him, they'll find me instead." The operators didn't need to be told twice. They disappeared up the stairs, and Carole knew she had maybe 10 minutes before reinforcements arrived or the police finally showed up in force. She turned to find Herrera watching her with an expression of mingled awe and horror. "Ghost, that's really your call sign?" "It was," Carole said tiredly. "A long time ago. And now I get you somewhere safe and disappear again." She moved to the stairwell, listening for sounds of additional threats. "Clear. There's a WHO medical transport that runs the border zone 3 times a week. They're legitimate, neutral, and they ask no questions. I can get you to their next pickup point. And then you tell them everything. Every name, every account number, Every secret you've been running from. Because that's the only way this ends without both of us dead. Herrera was quiet for a long moment. Then, why did you save me? You could have let them take me, could have stayed invisible. Carole looked at him, and for a moment, the exhaustion showed through. Because 3 years ago, I realized I'd spent my entire career protecting the wrong people, and I decided that if I ever got a chance to protect the right person, she shrugged. I guess tonight was that chance. They moved through the clinic's rear loading dock, where an old service van sat with keys helpfully left in the ignition, probably used by maintenance staff. Carole hot-wired it anyway, muscle memory making her bypass the ignition in under 30 seconds. As she drove, Herrera spoke quietly from the passenger seat. The thing I was going to expose. The people financing both sides of the conflict, using the war as a way to destabilize the region for resource extraction. That's what Black Arrow was hired to prevent. I know, Carole said. I read the report 3 years ago. It's part of why I died. You can't stay dead anymore. Not after tonight. I know, she said again, softer this time. They drove for 40 minutes in silence, following back roads and logging trails that wouldn't appear on any GPS. Eventually, they reached a small airstrip where a WHO medical plane was undergoing pre-flight checks. Carole stopped the van 100 yards out and turned to Herrera. When you get on that plane, tell them you need protective custody. Tell them you have information about war crimes and financial corruption that goes to the ministerial level. They'll know what to do. Herrera nodded slowly. Then he extended his hand. Thank you, Ghost. Or Carole. Or whoever you really are. She shook his hand. Just make it count. Make sure those names get to people who'll actually do something about it. I will. He climbed out of the van, then paused. What will you do? Carole looked out at the dark horizon, where the first hints of dawn were beginning to lighten the sky. I don't know yet. But I think trying to be invisible might not be an option anymore. She watched him walk to the plane, watched the Wu medical staff greet him with professional efficiency and help him aboard, watched the plane taxi down the runway and lift into the pre-dawn sky. Then she drove the van to a ravine 3 miles away, wiped it down, and sent it rolling into the gully where it would eventually be found stripped and useless. And Carole Cox, or whoever she really was, beneath all the names and legends and lies, walked into the forest as the sun rose behind her, leaving no tracks and no trace. A ghost once more. But this time, she carried something different. This time, she carried purpose. The mouse in blue scrubs was gone forever. The lion had returned. And somewhere in the world, the people who'd tried to bury her were about to learn that some ghosts don't stay buried. They come back, and they remember everything.